My name is Amanda Warren, and at 28 years old, I was finally returning home after 3 years away. I expected warm hugs and happy tears that Christmas night. Instead, my Aunt Diane opened the door, rolled her eyes and said, "We do not want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday." I looked past her shoulder and saw my entire family gathered around the dinner table, laughing together, like I never existed. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I just nodded, turned around and said, "Got it." 10 minutes later, as I was walking to my car, I heard the front door burst open and my dad Robert yelling my name. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button to hear more true stories that might just change how you think about family. Growing up in the Warren family, I never imagined I would one day be standing outside in the cold, uninvited to our traditional Christmas dinner. My childhood was filled with laughter, tight hugs, and the constant reassurance that family meant everything. As the youngest of 2 children, I enjoyed the special attention that came with being the baby of the family. My older brother David, 6 years my senior, pretended to be annoyed by my existence, but secretly slipped candy under my pillow every Friday night. Our parents, Robert and Catherine Warren, created a home where we felt safe and loved. My relationship with my father was particularly special. Dad always said I had his spirit but Mom's kind heart. He was a successful business owner who built his company from scratch, and despite his busy schedule, he never missed my school performances or art exhibitions. When I was 9, I painted a terrible portrait of him that looked more like a grumpy walrus than a human, but he proudly hung it in his office, where clients could see it. "That's my girl's masterpiece," he'd tell them with genuine pride. Mom was gentler, more reserved. She mediated conflicts and kept the peace, especially when it came to the extended family. I noticed early on how she would tense up slightly whenever Dad's younger sister, my Aunt Diane, came around. Mom never confronted Diane directly, even when her comments crossed the line. Aunt Diane had opinions about everything, particularly about how I was being raised. "You're spoiling her, Robert," she'd say, when Dad bought me art supplies instead of the educational toys she thought more appropriate. "Amanda needs discipline, not coddling." Even as a child, I sensed her disapproval of me, though I never understood why. Diane had a daughter of her own, my cousin Jessica, who was 2 years older than me. Jessica took piano lessons, excelled in mathematics, and always wore pristine dresses while I preferred paint-stained overalls and climbing trees. "Why can't you be more like Jessica?" became a refrain I heard too often, though never from my parents. Despite these undercurrents, Christmas was sacred in the Warren household. No matter what tensions existed throughout the year, everyone gathered at our home on Christmas Eve. Grandpa Thomas would carve the turkey, while Grandma Eleanor distributed her famous cranberry sauce. Uncle Patrick, Aunt Patricia, and their 3 kids would arrive with armfuls of presents. Even Great Aunt Martha, who complained about the 4-hour drive from Buffalo, never missed a year. The traditions were non-negotiable: matching pajamas on Christmas morning, Dad reading The Night Before Christmas in different silly voices, and Mom's special eggnog that she claimed had a secret ingredient which I later discovered was simply nutmeg and a healthy splash of bourbon. My favorite Christmas was when I was 10. It had snowed heavily, blanketing our yard in white. Dad built an elaborate snow fort with us, and even Mom joined the snowball fight that ensued. Later, huddled by the fireplace with hot chocolate, I remember looking around at my family and feeling absolutely safe, absolutely loved. But behind this idyllic picture, small fractures were forming. I overheard arguments between Dad and Aunt Diane when they thought no one was listening. "She's my daughter, Diane, not yours," Dad once said firmly, to which Diane replied, "Someone needs to think about her future, since you're too busy being her friend instead of her father." By the time I was 12, I had begun to notice how family gatherings often split into camps: those who sided with my parents' relaxed parenting style, and those who aligned with Aunt Diane's strict, achievement-oriented approach. The divide became more pronounced at holiday dinners, with subtle jabs disguised as concerns. "Amanda scored well on her art project, but how are her math grades?" Diane would ask loudly across the dinner table, knowing fully well that math was my weakest subject. Jessica, meanwhile, was presented as the gold standard. Jessica just won another piano competition, or Jessica has been accepted into the advanced placement program. Each announcement was delivered with a pointed look in my direction. Mom would squeeze my hand under the table while Dad would quickly change the subject to something less contentious. Did anyone try the mashed potatoes? Catherine added roasted garlic this year. These moments accumulated like small paper cuts, barely noticeable individually, but increasingly painful as they multiplied. Still, I never imagined these tensions would eventually lead to my exclusion from the family I loved so deeply. As a child, I believed family bonds were unbreakable, that blood truly was thicker than water. How naive I was. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed then. The way Grandpa Thomas would wink at me conspiratorially after one of Diane's backhanded compliments. The concerned glances Aunt Patricia would exchange with Mom when Diane dominated conversations. The subtle way our family portrait wall featured fewer and fewer pictures that included both our immediate family and Diane's as the years passed. But children see what they want to see, and I wanted to see a perfect family. So, that's what I believed we were, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. After all, we still gathered for every Christmas, still sang carols together, still exchanged gifts with forced smiles and hollow laughter. We were the Warrens, and family was everything to us. At least, that's what we kept telling ourselves. The first major crack in our family foundation appeared during my junior year of high school. I had always shown talent in art, spending hours sketching and painting, instead of studying for math tests or participating in the competitive sports Aunt Diane thought essential for college applications. When it came time to consider colleges, I set my heart on Parsons School of Design in New York City. My portfolio was strong, featuring detailed illustrations and experimental digital designs that my art teacher, Mrs. Hansen, called remarkably sophisticated for someone so young. Dad initially supported my dream, helping me photograph my artwork and staying up late to proofread my application essays. Mom worried about me being so far from home but never discouraged me. "Just promise you'll call often," she said already, anticipating the separation. The family dinner where I announced my college plans became the catalyst for what would eventually drive me away from home. Aunt Diane nearly choked on her roast beef. "Art school," she scoffed, placing her fork down with deliberate slowness. "Robert, surely you're not encouraging this foolishness. The girl needs a practical degree. Business accounting, something that will actually pay the bills." Dad's defense was immediate, but not as strong as I'd hoped. "Amanda has real talent, Diane. Not everyone needs to follow the same path." "Talent doesn't pay mortgages," Diane retorted. "Jessica is applying to Princeton for economics. That's a real future." The conversation escalated with Uncle Patrick surprisingly coming to my defense. "Let the kid follow her passion, for Christ's sake. Not everyone needs to be a corporate drone." "Easy for you to say," Diane snapped. "Your children have realistic goals. Amanda is throwing away her potential on some artistic fantasy." I sat silently watching my future become a battlefield. What hurt most wasn't Diane's dismissal of my dreams, but seeing Dad's resolve weaken as the argument continued. By dessert, he was suggesting I might consider a double major, perhaps business and art. Mom said nothing, just squeezed my hand under the table like she had done since I was small. That night marked a shift in our family dynamics. Dad began forwarding me emails about practical careers in creative fields and leaving brochures for state universities with strong business programs on my desk. Mom continued her silent support, but I missed the dad who had proudly displayed my walrus portrait. Despite the pressure, I applied only to art schools and was accepted to Parsons with a partial scholarship. The resulting tension lasted through my senior year graduation party, where Aunt Diane cornered me by the punch bowl. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said, her smile tight. "Your father worked hard to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay him, with some arty rebellion." I finally snapped. My art isn't a rebellion. It's who I am. And Dad supports me. Does he? She raised an eyebrow. Ask him how he feels about paying Manhattan rent for a degree that might land you a job designing coffee shop flyers. That exchange planted seeds of doubt that grew throughout my freshman year of college. During holiday breaks, I'd catch Dad looking at me with what seemed like disappointment, though he never said it outright. In my sophomore year, I met Michael Bennett in a general education economics class I was taking to fulfill a requirement. Tall with kind eyes and a sharp mind, Michael was studying finance, but had an unexpected appreciation for art. Our coffee study sessions turned into dinner dates, and by junior year we were inseparable. Michael was everything Aunt Diane would approve of, practical, ambitious, from a good family. When I brought him home for Christmas that year, the change in atmosphere was immediate. Dad engaged him in long conversations about market trends. Aunt Diane practically adopted him on sight. "Now this," she said loudly at dinner, "is someone with a future." The approval I'd sought for years was suddenly available to me through Michael. It was intoxicating. For a while I almost convinced myself I could be the person they wanted, a designer, with a sensible boyfriend who might eventually steer me toward a more practical, creative career, like commercial advertising. Michael and I stayed together through graduation. He accepted a position at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago, assuming I would follow. The problem was, I'd been offered an internship at a cutting-edge design studio in New York, a rare opportunity that could launch my career in the direction I actually wanted. "Long distance can work," I suggested during our senior week, sitting on the campus lawn where we'd had our first kiss. Michael looked at me with genuine confusion. "Why would we do long distance when we could be together in Chicago? There are design jobs everywhere, Amanda." "Not like this one," I explained. "This studio works with the clients I've dreamed of. It's a foot in the door that might never come again." The argument that followed revealed how differently we viewed our relationship. Michael had assumed I would prioritize our relationship over my career ambitions. I had assumed he would understand this was my equivalent of his dream job offer. When I chose New York over Chicago, the news hit my family like a bomb. Dad called it throwing away a good man for a long-shot career. Mom, in a rare moment of assertion, told him, "She's 22, Robert. Let her live her life." But it was Aunt Diane who truly twisted the knife. At a family dinner just before I left for New York, she raised her glass in a mock toast. "To Amanda, who always chooses herself over the people who love her. May New York be everything you deserve." The table fell silent. Jessica, who had recently graduated from Princeton as planned, smirked into her wine glass. Dad looked down at his plate. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I left for New York the next day without proper goodbyes. The distance that followed wasn't just geographical. Weekly calls home became monthly, then occasional. Dad's tone grew increasingly reserved. Mom tried to bridge the gap, but seemed constrained by loyalties I couldn't see. What I didn't know then was how thoroughly Aunt Diane had been working to reshape the narrative of my departure. In my absence, I was being recast, not as an ambitious young woman pursuing her dreams, but as a selfish, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her family and broken a good man's heart for the allure of big city life. And without me there to defend myself, the story took root and flourished. New York City greeted me with indifference the way it does all newcomers who arrive with dreams bigger than their bank accounts. My studio apartment in Bushwick was barely larger than my childhood bedroom, with a shower that leaked, and neighbors who fought loudly at 3 in the morning. The internship paid just enough to cover rent and ramen noodles, with nothing left for trips home even if I had wanted to go. The design studio, Beacon Creative, was everything I had hoped for professionally and more challenging than I had anticipated. My boss, Elizabeth Morgan, was a legend in the industry, known for her exacting standards and brutal honesty. "This concept is derivative," she said of my first major project, dropping my carefully crafted presentation boards onto my desk without a second glance. "Start over. And this time show me something I haven't seen in every college portfolio for the past decade." I spent the next 72 hours redesigning the entire campaign fueled by coffee and determination. When I presented again, Elizabeth studied my work in silence for a full minute. "Better," she finally said. "Not good yet, but better." From Elizabeth, this qualified as high praise. The other interns dubbed her the Dragon Lady, but I recognized what they didn't. Elizabeth pushed hardest those she believed had potential. I decided to prove her right. During those early months, loneliness was my constant companion. I called Mom weekly conversations that became increasingly strained as she avoided mentioning Dad or responding directly to questions about family gatherings. "Everyone's fine, sweetheart," she would say. "Your father's just busy with the company expansion." Friends came unexpectedly in the form of Stephanie Chen and Rachel Garcia, fellow creative professionals I met at an industry mixer. Stephanie, a photographer with an infectious laugh, and Rachel, a copywriter with a wickedly sharp wit, adopted me into their circle with an ease that made me realize how tense my relationships back home had been. Chosen family, Stephanie called our trio, sometimes more important than the one you're born into. By the end of my first year, Elizabeth had promoted me from intern to junior designer, with a salary that allowed me to move to a slightly less dismal apartment in Astoria. My work began appearing in industry publications, and clients started requesting me specifically for projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. As my professional star rose, my connection to home deteriorated. Dad never called directly anymore. When I reached out, our conversations were surface level and brief. "The business is doing well," he would say. "Weather's been mild for November," never asking about my work or accomplishments, which he could have easily seen online if he'd looked. It was Mom who finally told me 18 months after I'd left that Jessica and Michael were dating. "I thought you should hear it from family," she said gently. "They've been seeing each other for a few months now." The news shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. Michael and I had been over for nearly 2 years. But something about Jessica dating him felt deliberately spiteful, especially when Mom hesitantly added, "They met at your Aunt Diane's Labor Day barbecue. She invited him specially." I imagined Diane orchestrating the match, serving her daughter my discarded boyfriend, like a prize she'd claimed on my behalf. I wondered if Michael compared us, if Jessica knew intimate details about me through him. The thought made me physically ill. Rachel and Stephanie took me out for drinks that night, letting me cycle through anger, hurt, and eventually gallows humor about the situation. Next thing you know, they'll name their firstborn Amanda, just to really twist the knife, I joked through tears. "Screw them," Rachel said fiercely. "You're building something real here while they're playing small-town dynasty." She was right. By my 3rd year in New York, I had been promoted again to senior designer. Elizabeth had become something of a mentor, pushing me to develop my distinctive style and voice. "You have something original to say," she told me during my performance review. "That's rarer than you think." I had almost made peace with the distance from my family when the call came 3 weeks before Christmas in my 3rd year away. "Amanda, it's Dad." His voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before he cleared his throat. "Your mother and I were hoping you might come home for Christmas this year. It's been too long." The invitation caught me completely off guard. Really, I mean, yes, I'd like that, but I thought, "Family should be together at Christmas," he said, cutting off whatever I was about to confess. "Just think about it, okay?" After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone. Part of me longed desperately to go home to repair what had broken. Another part remembered Aunt Diane's cutting remarks, Jessica's smug smile, Dad's growing distance. "It's a trap," Stephanie warned when I told her about the invitation. "They'll spend the whole time guilt-tripping you about leaving." "Or maybe they miss you," Rachel countered. "People can change in 3 years." I decided to hope Rachel was right. I booked a flight home, reserved a hotel room as a precaution, and spent more than I should have on thoughtful gifts for everyone, including Jessica, and yes, even Aunt Diane. As the plane took off from JFK, I allowed myself to imagine a warm reunion, tearful apologies, A fresh start with my family. Looking back, I can't decide if that optimism was bravery or foolishness, perhaps a bit of both. What I couldn't have known was that Aunt Diane had spent those 3 years systematically poisoning my family against me, that Jessica had fed Michael's wounded ego with carefully crafted lies about things I'd supposedly said about him, or that Dad had slowly been convinced I had abandoned them all out of selfish ambition. I was flying home to a narrative about myself I didn't recognize, written by people who claimed to love me. The first snowflakes of the evening were starting to fall as my rental car pulled into the familiar streets of my hometown. Driving through the main square felt like entering a time capsule. The same holiday decorations hung from lampposts, the same giant Christmas tree stood proudly in front of City Hall, and Gunderson's Bakery still had a line out the door for their famous gingerbread cookies. My chest tightened with unexpected emotion. This place had shaped me for better or worse. Before heading to my parents' house, I had several stops to make. First was the cemetery where my grandmother Eleanor had been laid to rest during my second year in New York. I hadn't been able to attend the funeral. Absence Aunt Diane had apparently characterized as Amanda being too busy with her fancy career to say goodbye to the woman who knitted her baby blanket. Standing at Grandma's grave with a small bouquet of her favorite white carnations, I whispered apologies and updates about my life. "I think you would have been proud, Grandma. I'm doing work I love. I wish you could see it." Next came the carefully wrapped presents in my trunk, each selected with specific recipients in mind. For Mom, a delicate silver necklace with a pendant made by an artist friend. For Dad, a rare first edition of his favorite mystery novel I'd found in a Brooklyn bookshop. Even for Aunt Diane, I'd chosen an expensive cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of burgundy. "Kill them with kindness," as Grandma would have said. At the hotel, I changed into a simple but elegant emerald green dress, applied light makeup, and tried to calm my racing heart. The plan was to arrive at 7, just as Christmas dinner would be starting. Walking into the familiar ritual might ease the awkwardness of my return. On my way out, I bumped into Linda Parker, my best friend from high school, in the hotel lobby. "Amanda Warren. Oh my God." She embraced me warmly. "I heard rumors you were coming back for Christmas." We chatted briefly, her eyes widening when I mentioned heading to my parents' house. "Oh, you're going to the family dinner?" A strange expression crossed her face. "Have you talked to your mom recently?" "Just to confirm the time." "Why?" Linda hesitated. "No reason. Just... It might be a full house tonight." She hugged me again before leaving. "Call me tomorrow. We should catch up properly." Her odd behavior left me unsettled as I drove the familiar route to my childhood home. The streets were quieter than I remembered. Most families already gathered indoors around dinner tables and Christmas trees. I parked a few houses down, taking a moment to observe the warm glow emanating from my parents' windows. The driveway was full: Mom's SUV, Dad's sedan, Aunt Diane's luxury crossover, and several cars I didn't recognize. Through the large front window, I could see movement, people gathering around the dining room. For a brief cowardly moment, I considered driving back to the hotel. What if they didn't want me there after all? What if Dad's invitation had been extended under pressure from Mom? "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "This is your family, your home." Gathering my courage and armful of gifts, I walked up the path I had raced along countless times as a child. Christmas music and laughter spilled from inside. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The laughter didn't stop immediately. I heard footsteps approaching, then the porch light flickered on, illuminating me through the decorative window in the door. There was a pause, then the door swung open. Aunt Diane stood there, her face transitioning from holiday cheer to cold recognition. She was dressed impeccably, as always, not a strand of her dark hair out of place, despite being 3 hours into hosting duties. "Amanda." My name sounded like an accusation on her lips. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Diane." I smiled, holding out her gift. "Dad invited me. I hope it's okay that I'm a little late." She didn't take the package, just stared at me with naked contempt. "We do not want you here. Go ruin someone else's holiday." The words hit like physical blows. Through the open door, I could see into the dining room where my entire family sat around the table laden with traditional Christmas fare. Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Michael. They were laughing together, crystal glasses of wine raised in some toast I wasn't part of. No one looked toward the door. No one noticed me standing there. They continued their celebration as if the scene at the entrance wasn't happening. "But Dad called me," I stammered. "He asked me to come." A moment of weakness he regretted immediately. Diane's voice was low, almost triumphant. "He realized what you really are. We all have." I looked past her again, hoping to catch Dad's eye to see some indication that she was lying. But he was deep in conversation with Michael, who had his arm casually draped across the back of Jessica's chair. My cousin wore an engagement ring that caught the light as she gestured animatedly. The realization hit me like ice water. This was an engagement celebration disguised as Christmas dinner. My invitation had been rescinded, but no one had bothered to tell me. "Got it," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady, as I placed the stack of gifts on the porch step. "Merry Christmas." I turned and walked back down the path, snow beginning to coat my hair and shoulders. No tears came, just a hollow numbness spreading through my chest. I had nearly reached my car when I heard the front door slam open again. Amanda, wait." My father's voice urgent and breathless. I turned slowly to see him running toward me, without a coat, house slippers sliding dangerously on the snowy sidewalk. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, confusion, rather than joy coloring his features. "Why didn't you call to say you were coming?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You invited me, Dad. 3 weeks ago. We talked about it." "I never," he began, then stopped, comprehension dawning. "I never made that call." We stood facing each other in the gently falling snow, 3 years of distance and misunderstanding between us. The man who had once proudly displayed my childish art looked like a stranger now, his face lined with emotions I couldn't read. "Then who did?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Before he could respond, another figure appeared at the doorway. My mother, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "Amanda," she called, her voice breaking. "Is that really you?" Behind her emerged more faces, Jessica looking stunned, Michael uncomfortable, and Aunt Diane, whose expression had transformed from contempt to something approaching fear. The fragile piece of their Christmas dinner was about to shatter, and in that moment, standing in the snow between my car and my former home, I had to decide whether to walk away from the confrontation or face it head-on. "You should come inside," Dad said finally, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "We need to talk." "No, she shouldn't," Aunt Diane called from the doorway. "Robert, think about Jessica's evening. This isn't the time." My cousin stepped forward, her engagement ring catching the porch light. "Actually, I think it's exactly the time. Let her in, Dad." Dad looked torn between the women in his family, a position he seemed to have occupied for years without my realizing it. Finally, he nodded toward the house. "Please, Amanda. It's freezing out here." Walking back into my childhood home felt like entering a museum of my former life. The same family photos lined the hallway, though I noticed newer ones had been added where I was conspicuously absent. The Christmas tree stood in its traditional corner, decorated with the same ornaments we'd collected over decades, including the misshapen clay star I'd made in 3rd grade. The dining room fell silent as I entered. 7 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. Mom, Dad, Aunt Diane, Jessica, Michael, Uncle, Patrick, and Aunt Patricia, who immediately stood and embraced me. "Look at you," she whispered, "all grown up and gorgeous." Her warmth was a stark contrast to the tension filling the room. Mom approached next, tears streaming openly down her face as she touched my cheek, as if confirming I was real. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "No one told me." "I invited her," came a voice from the kitchen doorway. My brother David stood there holding a carving knife and looking defiant. 3 weeks ago. Used Dad's phone while he was in the shower. Dad turned to him in shock. You, what? Someone had to do something to fix this family, David said. 3 years, Dad. 3 Christmases without my sister, because of lies and manipulation. Aunt Diane slammed her palm against the dining table, making the crystal jump. Don't you dare blame this family for her choices. She's the one who left. She's the one who broke Michael's heart, and never looked back. Michael, who had been studying his wine glass intently, finally looked up. That's not exactly true, Diane. Jessica's head whipped toward him. What? Amanda didn't break my heart, he said quietly. We broke up because our careers were taking us in different directions. It was mutual. I told you that. That's not what you told me. Jessica's voice had a dangerous edge. You said she dumped you to pursue her big city dreams. Michael shifted uncomfortably. That's what your mother told me to say when she set us up. She said it would help me move on if I reframed the narrative. The room erupted into chaos. Jessica turned on her mother, demanding explanations. Dad confronted David about the deceptive phone call. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Patrick exchanged knowing looks that suggested they'd been waiting for this explosion for years. Through it all, Mom moved to stand beside me, her hand finding mine just like she used to do, under the dinner table, when Aunt Diane said something cutting. Enough. Dad's voice silenced the room. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Amanda, I need to understand. Why did you stop calling? Why did you miss your grandmother's funeral? Before I could answer, Aunt Diane interrupted. Oh, for God's sake, Robert. She was building her precious career. We weren't important enough anymore. Is that true? Dad asked me directly. I took a deep breath. I called every week for the first year, Dad. You stopped picking up. As for Grandma's funeral, I only found out after it happened. The message Mom left said it was a small family-only service scheduled for when I had my final portfolio review. I couldn't change the date without failing my program. Mom gasped. I never said that. I left you 3 messages begging you to come home, saying we'd delay the service if needed. All eyes turned to Aunt Diane, who had suddenly become very interested in rearranging the silverware beside her plate. Diane, Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. Did you interfere with messages between my daughter and our family? I was protecting you, she said defensively. You were a wreck after she left. Every time she called with stories about her exciting New York life, you'd be depressed for days. And Catherine was even worse, moping around, checking her phone constantly. So you took it upon yourself to filter my calls. Mom's voice shook with rage. I'd never heard from her before. To lie about my mother's funeral to my own daughter. Aunt Diane straightened her spine, doubling down. Someone had to be the strong one. This family was falling apart because Amanda decided her ambitions were more important than her responsibilities. What responsibilities? I finally found my voice. I was 22 years old. My only responsibility was to build a life I could be proud of. A life away from the people who raised you, Diane shot back. A life you never supported. The words burst out of me. From the moment I showed interest in art instead of business, you've been undermining me, belittling my choices, comparing me to Jessica, and apparently poisoning my family against me while I was gone. Jessica stood suddenly. Is that true, Mom? Did you deliberately keep Amanda away? Diane turned to her daughter, clearly expecting solidarity. I did what was necessary to protect this family, including you. Or have you forgotten how devastated you were when Michael kept talking about her during your first dates? Michael's head snapped up. I never talked about Amanda on our dates. Yes, you did, Jessica insisted. You said she was the most talented person you'd ever met, that New York was lucky to have her. I never said that to you. Michael looked genuinely confused. The only person I ever discussed Amanda with was your mother, when she called to invite me to dinner the first time. A terrible silence fell over the room, as understanding dawned on everyone simultaneously. Aunt Diane had been the architect of a 3-year campaign to erase me from my family, manipulating everyone's perceptions and literally intercepting communications. "Why?" Dad asked, his voice breaking. "Diane, she's my daughter. Why would you do this?" Diane's composure finally cracked. "Because she was ruining everything. The family business you built that was supposed to be for our children. Jessica trained in economics for that company. But you were going to give Amanda equal share, even though she contributed nothing. Just like our father always favored you, you favored her." The raw jealousy in her voice stunned everyone. This wasn't about my choices or Michael or even family traditions. This was about a rivalry between siblings that had festered for decades and spilled over onto the next generation. "I never wanted the business," I said quietly. "I never asked for a share." "But he would have given it to you anyway," Diane spat. "Just for being Robert's precious artistic daughter, while Jessica worked and studied and did everything right." Jessica looked at her mother with new eyes. "Is that what this has all been about? Using me to compete with Amanda? With Uncle Robert?" "No, sweetheart. I was securing your future. Our future." Diane reached for her daughter's hand, but Jessica pulled away. "By lying. By manipulating everyone. Including me." Jessica turned to Michael. "Did you ever actually want to date me? Or was that my mother's orchestration too?" Michael looked trapped. "I care about you, Jess." But the engagement was moving very fast, and Diane was the one who suggested Christmas would be the perfect time to announce it. Jessica pulled the ring from her finger and placed it on the table with devastating quietness. "I think you should go." "Jessica, no," Diane protested. "I think we all need some space," Dad interrupted, his authority returning. "Michael, perhaps it would be best if you left for tonight. We need to have a family discussion." Michael nodded, relieved to escape. As he passed me on his way out, he paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. And congratulations on your success. I've seen your work online. It's remarkable." After he left, the remaining family members stared at each other across the ruins of Christmas dinner. Uncle Patrick broke the silence with a slow clap. "Well done, Diane. You've successfully manipulated everyone in this room for years. I hope you're satisfied." Patrick, Aunt Patricia warned, but he waved her off. "No, I'm done being polite about this. I've watched her drive a wedge in this family since we were kids. Always the victim, always pulling strings, and Robert always too loyal to see it." Dad sank into a chair, looking suddenly older. "I should have protected you," he said, looking at me. "I let Diane convince me you were better off without us holding you back. That asking about your work would make you feel pressured, that you needed space." "I never wanted space," I said, tears finally coming. "I wanted my family to be proud of me." Mom moved to Dad's side, her hand on his shoulder. "We've been fools, Robert. All of us." As the full extent of Diane's deception unfolded through tearful conversations, Jessica abruptly left the room. I found her in the kitchen, angrily washing dishes that didn't need washing. "I'm sorry," I offered. "About Michael, about all of this." "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't be nice to me right now. I've been horrible to you for years." "You didn't know." "I should have." She put down the plate she was scrubbing. "I believed everything Mom said about you because it was easier than admitting I was jealous. You had the courage to pursue what you loved while I followed the path laid out for me." It was perhaps the most honest conversation Jessica and I had ever had. As we talked, the anger in the dining room gradually shifted to grief, then to cautious reconciliation. By midnight, Aunt Diane had left alone. Dad had apologized a dozen times, and Mom hadn't let go of my hand for hours. The night ended with exhausted promises to rebuild, to communicate directly, to resist Diane's inevitable attempts to regain control. As I prepared to leave for my hotel, Dad asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Will you come back tomorrow, for Christmas Day?" The vulnerability in his eyes reminded me of the father who had hung my terrible portrait in his office. "Yes," I said. "But this isn't fixed yet. We have a lot to work through. I know, he nodded, but it's a start. As I drove back to the hotel emotionally drained, but strangely hopeful, I realized we had all been complicit in allowing Diane's manipulation to succeed. My absence had created the vacuum she filled with lies. Dad's avoidance of conflict had given her power. Jessica's insecurity had made her susceptible. The real question was whether we could rebuild what had been broken, or if the damage was too deep to repair. I slept fitfully at the hotel, waking before dawn with my mind racing. After 3 cups of mediocre coffee from the lobby machine, I called Stephanie and Rachel in New York, putting them on speaker as I paced my room. "So your aunt is basically a villain from a soap opera," Rachel summarized after I recounted the previous night's revelations, "and your family just let her run the show for 3 years." "People believe what's easiest," Stephanie said thoughtfully. "It was probably easier for them to think you abandoned them than to question Diane's version of events." "What are you going to do now?" Rachel asked. "Please tell me you're not just going to forgive and forget." I hadn't decided yet. Part of me wanted to catch the next flight back to New York and leave this mess behind. Another part recognized this might be the only chance to truly heal the rift in my family. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Breakfast at my place, 9 a.m. We need to talk. 1723 Oak Ridge Lane. Aunt Patricia." Aunt Patricia had always been the family peacemaker, married to Dad's older brother Patrick. Unlike Diane, she stayed out of family politics, focusing instead on her career as a judge. If she was getting involved now, the situation was even more serious than I thought. The address led me to a stately colonial on the other side of town. Inside, I was surprised to find not just Patricia and Patrick, but also my brother David, my cousins from Patricia's side, and several of my parents' oldest friends. "What is this?" I asked, accepting the coffee Patricia pressed into my hands. "Emergency Family Council," David said grimly. "Turns out, Aunt Diane's been busy with more than just character assassination." Over the next 2 hours, I learned the full extent of Diane's machinations. She had systematically isolated my parents from their support network, while insinuating herself into Dad's business affairs. As his trusted sister, she had convinced him to make a series of investments that primarily benefited her own financial interests. Jessica's economic expertise had been used to legitimize decisions that secretly funneled resources away from the company's growth and toward Diane's personal ventures. "We've been tracking this for months," Patrick explained, spreading financial documents across Patricia's dining table. "But we needed proof before confronting Robert. Diane's too clever to leave obvious tracks." "And now we have it," Patricia added, sliding a folder toward me. "This arrived yesterday from the family attorney. Your grandmother's will has a codicil none of us knew about. She left specific instructions about the family trust that Diane has been violating." I flipped through legal documents I barely understood. "Why show me this? I'm not a lawyer or an accountant." "Because you're the only one Diane can't manipulate anymore," David said. "You've been outside her influence for years, and you have skills we need." My confusion must have shown because Patricia smiled. "We need someone who can present complex information visually, someone who can help Robert see the pattern without getting lost in the details." They wanted me to create an infographic presentation of Diane's financial maneuvers, something clear enough that Dad couldn't deny or rationalize away. It was, ironically, exactly the kind of project I excelled at professionally. I spent the morning at Patricia's dining table with my laptop transforming dense financial records into a compelling visual narrative. Flowcharts showed how money moved from Dad's company through shell corporations back to Diane. Timeline graphics illustrated how her helpful suggestions aligned with suspicious transactions. By noon, I had created a presentation that would make Elizabeth proud. "This is remarkable," Patrick said, reviewing my work. "You've made 3 years of financial manipulation understandable in 15 slides." The plan was to present this at dinner that evening, when the extended family would gather at my parents' house. Diane would be there, having been invited by Mom in a carefully worded text, designed not to arouse suspicion. She thinks she's coming to help damage control after last night, David explained. She has no idea what's waiting for her. As we prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside. This isn't just about the money, Amanda. This is about freeing your father from a lifelong pattern of manipulation. He's always protected. Diane always made excuses for her behavior. It's time for that to stop. I nodded, understanding the real stakes. This wasn't vengeance, it was intervention. The Christmas Day gathering was awkward from the start. Jessica arrived first, subdued, but determined to be part of the confrontation. Mom busied herself in the kitchen while Dad made nervous small talk. When Diane finally arrived, her expression was conciliatory, clearly prepared to play the role of the misunderstood but forgiving sister. I've been thinking about last night, she began, accepting the glass of wine Dad offered. Emotions were running high. Things were said in the heat of the moment. What matters is that we're family, and family forgives. The calculated humility in her tone turned my stomach. Before Dad could respond with his usual pacifying agreement, Patrick stepped forward. Actually, Diane, we have something to discuss before forgiveness comes into the picture. Her eyes narrowed slightly at his tone. What's this about? Dad looked confused as Patrick connected a laptop to the living room television. Patrick, it's Christmas. Whatever business matter this is can wait. No, Robert, it can't, Patricia said firmly. Please just watch. I took control of the presentation, clicking through the slides I'd created. With each new revelation, Diane's face grew paler, while Dad's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to dawning anger. The West Side Development Project, I explained, highlighting a particularly egregious example. Dad, you invested $300,000, based on Diane's recommendation. The project was secretly controlled by her husband's firm, which extracted consulting fees of nearly $90,000 before the project mysteriously failed. That's a grotesque misrepresentation, Diane protested. The market crashed. Everyone lost money. Except you, Patrick countered. Your private LLC collected fees throughout the project's development and liquidation. As the evidence mounted, Diane's denials became increasingly desperate. When we reached the slide about Grandma Eleanor's will and the family trust, she actually tried to leave, only to find David blocking the doorway. You used me, Jessica said, her voice shaking. You used my economics degree to legitimize your embezzlement, made me complicit in stealing from my own family. I was securing your future, Diane insisted. Everything I did was for you, for this family. Stop lying. Dad's voice was quiet but firm. It's over, Diane. I can see it all now. Not just the financial manipulation, but everything. How you turned me against my own daughter. How you isolated Catherine and me from the rest of the family. How you've been driving wedges between us all for years. Diane's composure finally cracked completely. You've always had everything handed to you, Robert. Dad's approval. Mom's love. A successful business. A perfect family. What was I supposed to do? Watch from the sidelines while Amanda inherited everything despite contributing nothing. I never wanted your business, Dad, I said gently. I only wanted your support. Dad crossed the room to stand beside me, his hand on my shoulder. You always had it, even when I was too weak to show it properly. I'm so sorry, Amanda. The confrontation continued for another hour, with Diane cycling through denial, anger, blame, and finally, when all else failed, tears. But the united front of family members proved impervious to tactics that had worked for decades. By evening's end, decisions had been made. Dad would restructure the business with Patrick's help, removing Diane from any position of influence. The misappropriated funds would be traced and recovered where possible. Most importantly, direct communication would replace the filtered, manipulated version Diane had managed for years. As she finally left, defeated, but still defiant, Jessica stopped her at the door. I need time, Mom. A lot of time. What you did. I don't know if I can forgive it. You'll understand someday, Diane said bitterly, when you have a daughter of your own to protect. If I ever have a daughter, Jessica replied, I'll protect her by teaching her honesty and respect, not manipulation and deceit." After she left, the remaining family members looked at each other in exhausted relief. Mom brought out the Christmas desserts that had been forgotten in last night's chaos. As we gathered around the table again this time, without the toxic presence that had poisoned our relationships for so long, I felt a tentative hope beginning to grow. To new beginnings, Dad proposed raising his glass in a toast that felt like both an ending and a start. The following Christmas looked nothing like those that had come before. For one thing, it was held in my apartment in Brooklyn, which barely accommodated the Christmas tree, let alone the 8 people gathered around my dining table. Mom and Dad had flown in 3 days earlier, marveling at the city with the wide-eyed wonder of first-time visitors, rather than the judgment I had feared. Dad had insisted on seeing my office at Beacon Creative, where Elizabeth had surprised me by offering warm praise of my work to my beaming father. "She's one of our most valuable designers," she told him, uncharacteristically generous. "You should be proud." "I am," Dad said simply, the words healing something in me I hadn't realized was still broken. David came with his new girlfriend Alicia, whom he'd met during the legal proceedings to recover the funds Diane had misappropriated. Jessica arrived alone, still finding her footing after breaking her engagement and changing her career path from finance to nonprofit work. "Turns out I'm actually good at grant writing," she had told me, over one of our now regular phone calls. Who knew communication could be my strength? The most surprising guests were Stephanie and Rachel, who had integrated seamlessly into my biological family, offering Mom cooking tips and debating basketball with Dad, as if they'd known each other for years. Aunt Diane was conspicuously absent, having moved to Florida after the dust settled. The separation had been necessary, though not without pain. Dad still called her monthly, maintaining a cautious relationship that was no longer central to our family dynamics. "Some relationships can't be fully restored," Mom had observed wisely, "but they can be redefined in healthier ways." The year between confrontation and celebration had been one of healing and adjustment. Dad had restructured his company with Jessica's help, implementing transparent practices that had actually improved profitability. Mom had rediscovered her passion for teaching, returning to part-time work at the local community college. My own career had flourished, with Elizabeth making me a partner in a new venture focused on nonprofit clients. The work was fulfilling in ways I had always hoped for, allowing me to use my design skills for causes I believed in. But the most profound changes had been internal. The anger I had carried first toward Diane and then toward my parents for believing her had gradually transformed into understanding. Not excusing, but understanding. Hurt people," Rachel had said during one of our late-night talks. "Diane's insecurity and jealousy weren't about you. They were reflections of her own pain." Learning to maintain boundaries while practicing forgiveness had been my greatest challenge. Weekly therapy sessions helped, as did the honest conversations with family members that had once seemed impossible. As we sat around my small table that Christmas, I realized we had created something new from the ruins of what Diane had destroyed. Not a perfect family, but an authentic one. One where disagreements were expressed directly, where appreciation was spoken aloud, where past mistakes were acknowledged rather than buried. After dinner, as we exchanged gifts, Dad handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a silver frame containing the photograph of my terrible childhood portrait of him, the original, having been lost years ago. "I kept this all this time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even during the years we were apart. It reminded me of who we really were, beneath all the confusion." Later that night, after everyone had returned to their hotels or spare rooms, my phone rang with an unexpected call. It was Diane. "Merry Christmas," she said, her voice hesitant. "I hope I'm not intruding." "It's okay," I replied, stepping onto my small balcony for privacy. "Merry Christmas to you too." "I've been seeing someone," she said after an awkward pause. "A therapist. It's been illuminating." We talked for 20 minutes, the conversation careful but not hostile. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. but it was a beginning, however small. When spring arrived, I received a job offer from a prestigious San Francisco firm. 5 years earlier, I would have jumped at the opportunity, seeing it as validation of my talent. Now, I weighed it carefully against the relationships I had rebuilt and the community I had created. I chose to stay in New York, close enough to visit family regularly, but maintaining the independence I valued. It wasn't a sacrifice, but a conscious choice, recognizing that success meant different things at different stages of life. The following Thanksgiving, Jessica brought her new boyfriend to dinner. Dad expanded his business into a new market. Mom started painting again, a hobby she had abandoned decades ago. Life moved forward as it always does. What I learned through those difficult years was that family bonds are neither as fragile nor as unbreakable as I once believed. They require maintenance, honest communication, and sometimes painful restructuring. The blood ties that connect us are just the beginning. The relationships we build on that foundation are what truly matter. I also learned that sometimes you have to leave home to find yourself, but that doesn't mean you can't bring that self back to the place you began. The distance gave me perspective, helping me see patterns that were invisible from within. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean standing alone. By finding my voice and speaking my truth, I made it possible for others to do the same. The confrontation with Diane ultimately freed not just me but my entire family from patterns of manipulation that had limited us all. As I look back on that snowy Christmas night, when my aunt opened the door and told me I wasn't welcome, I can now see it as the catalyst that ultimately saved our family. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead us to the most necessary truths. If you've ever been excluded by family made to feel unwelcome in the place that should be your safest haven, know that your worth isn't determined by their acceptance. Sometimes the greatest act of love toward your family is refusing to participate in toxic patterns, even when that refusal comes at a high personal cost. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about family healing and personal growth. I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up to a family member who was causing harm, and how that changed your family dynamics. Was forgiveness part of your journey, or did you need to maintain distance for your own well-being? Your experiences might help others who are walking similar paths. Wishing you all healthy boundaries and genuine connections with those you choose to call family.